Hey there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have the Brutus Monroe Beautiful Blooms Inspiration Box, and this is still available, so I will link that down below. But let's go ahead and take a look at what comes in the kit. There is always the postcard with the beautiful enamel pin. This one is a rose. Last month was different. They're different every month. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the other fun goodies. So I'm going to pull out the bag of all the goodies. So there's a Doris embossing folder, which has all those flowers. And then look at all that stuff. Oh my goodness. You also get a spool of purple ribbon, and that bobbin actually has a little surprise if you peel off all the ribbon underneath. Then you get this Doris pack of gems. There's 78 in there. That's quite a lot of gems. You're going to get some paper flowers, which I thought these were so pretty because they each have like a little center to them. Aren't those cute? And easy to put on cards and not a lot of bulk. Then you're also going to get this sequin mix with a very generous amount of sequins in it. All kinds of little flowers. And then there's this duct tape. I was really excited about this duct tape. It's like a lace duct tape, and you get so much of it. So it doesn't tear, as I tried to, just like typical duct tape, it doesn't really tear. So I did cut it with my scissors, but look at how beautiful that is. Oh my goodness, you're going to be able to do a lot of projects with that. Love that stuff. And there's like 10 yards of it, so yeah, you're going to be working with that for a while. And then a couple of Brutus Monroe items in there. This one is the brand new Sea Glass Surface Ink from Brutus Monroe. As of now, this is the only way you can get this, is in this kit. And so I swatched it out for you to kind of take a look. And I've never had any of their surface inks before, so I thought I would kind of experiment with it. This would be a good ink for watercoloring. If you stamp your image and you want to watercolor the image, because the inks they're waterproof basically, which is nice. So I tried even watercoloring with them, and that didn't work so well. And then I do rub my Copic over it. I don't know that I would typically stamp with like a blue ink and then try and color that in with my alcohol markers, but it didn't seem to bleed too much. I suppose I'd have to do a little bit more research and kind of experiment a little bit more, but anyway, it's an absolutely beautiful color, and I use that in the first card, so I'm excited about that. Excited to try that out. And then, the Chroma Glaze. Love their Chroma Glaze. Now, I haven't used it in a video, but I actually have several of their Chroma Glazes, and I swatched them out, and look at how beautiful those are when they dry. They are gorgeous and shiny, and they're so pretty. So I'm excited to use that yellow, which everybody's box will come with a different color, so you may not get yellow, just so you know. Then this awesome stencil. This is the rose stencil. I think this is new as far as like stencils that they do. And then we also have their card panels. Now I love these because these are foilable, and you can color on them, you can ink on them. I haven't tried watercoloring because it's not a watercolor paper technically, but if you like to color, these are for you. So you get 2 each of the 4 different panels. And like I said, you can foil these, and I will show you that as we get going on this. But I love those big flowers. Oh, those were so fun to color. So fun. Then here's one of our 6x6 paper packs here. We've got the glitter stock in green, and I love it because the glitter doesn't come off. Then we have one of their resistibles in 6x6. So I'm going to do some inking over that. Then we have a linen cardstock in white and also a regular white cardstock. And then we also have the pack of cardstock. And these are not heavyweight, but I do end up using these for my card bases mostly. But you get 2 each of 5 colors. And I don't mind using the lighter weight for my card bases. I think it's fine. But yeah, so really pretty colors, very spring colors. And then our stamp set is gorgeous. This is called Spring Wreath. And if you don't get the box, you can always get the stamp set, but it's totally worth getting the box because the box is $34.99 and the stamp set alone is worth $23.99. So if you like the stamp set, go get that box. For the first card, I want to do something called Trapped Embossing that I recently saw on Jennifer McGuire's page. And it's nothing new, but I'm going to take that Sea Glass surface ink, and I'm going to just rub it all over the surface of the white cardstock that came in the kit. This was the easiest way to get all the ink all over that page, and that's what I wanted to do. I love that blue. It's such a pretty, pretty blue. And this is part of the reason why I like to work on my glass mat. It's such easy cleanup. Just spray it with some water and wipe it down. And that's pretty much with every type of medium that I'm using. So I'm going to heat set this to make sure that it is good and dry, because I plan to do some embossing over it. And I'll test it several times. See here, obviously I didn't do a very good job. So I'm going to wipe all that embossing powder off just with a dry brush. And then I will try and heat set it a little bit more. And then you'll see that I do a better job. So then I'm going to cover it with my embossing bag. And I'll make sure that that is maybe, and that works so much better. So I will stick this inside of my Tim Holtz stamp platform. And I'm going to grab out one of the stamps. And this is that beautiful wreath stamp. It's such an intricate, pretty stamp. And so I will pick that up with the door, and then I will ink that up with some Versamark ink. I'm just going to ink that up really nicely, and then I have my clear embossing powder sitting off to the side. So I'll make sure that I get that stamped down really well, and you can tell, you'll be able to see, because it will change the color of the ink underneath, or the paper. And then I will cover that with my clear embossing powder. Just making sure that I get very good coverage. And then once I've got that good and covered, so I take my dry brush, because there's a few spots where I don't do a great job. So I take my dry brush in some areas where I got a little excess powder, and I'll wipe that away. And then I'm going to take my heat tool, and I'm going to heat that until that is smooth and melted. And it doesn't look like much here, but it will. So I'm going to repeat that process till that page is covered with the wreath. So I will stamp that out several more times. And you can't really tell, but it is covered. But now I've got some white ink that I'm using. So this is like a white pigment ink, and I'm going to sponge that all over this panel. And in between I will wipe away wherever the embossing is. So this is where that trapped embossing comes in. So I'll just cover it with the white panel, and it'll lighten all the blue on the background, except for where I have the clear embossing powder and the stamped image. So underneath that, you are going to see that it's trapped. The color is trapped under there, and that's where the trapped embossing title comes from. So this is fun, and I really like the way it ends up looking. I'll just keep going, covering that, making sure that it is all covered, and then using my dry cloth, which is just a microfiber cloth, I will wipe away the excess ink over the top of the embossing, because that resists that pigment ink. And I like that. It's subtle, but I really, really like that. So for a final bit over the top of this, I'm going to heat that so that it'll make the embossing powder shiny once again, because it's dull after you've covered it with the pigment ink. And then you heat it back up, and it just kind of melts that embossing powder once again, and it's all shiny again. So then I'm going to stick that inside of my makeshift splatter box, and I'm going to spray that with like just a mist, a sparkle mist basically, so that it'll be even shinier. And then I will heat that till that is dry as well. So I've trimmed that panel down as well. You'll see that later, but now I'm just going to stamp my sentiment. So I've grabbed some of the dark pink cardstock that came in the kit, and I'm going to ink that up with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, just because I want a very crisp black image, and it only takes one pass. So then I'll clean off my stamp, and I'll trim that down, and then I'm going to fold some of the pink cardstock, the light pink cardstock that came in the kit. And typically I would grab my Score Buddy for this to fold that, but it's such a lightweight cardstock that I could do it with my hands, and I wasn't worried about messing up the paper. I'll use some liquid glue to glue down my panel. And then I'm going to cover the back of my sentiment with some foam tape. I'll peel off the backing of that, and then I will stick that down on the front. And then for a final bit of embellishment, I'm going to use that liquid glue with those little paper flowers that came in the kit. These are so stinking cute. And I just thought they really set off that sentiment nicely. And I love the sentiments in this set. Hold on, things will get better. So I'll put 2 on the top there and 3 on that bottom, making sure that those stay down pretty well. And that liquid glue will hold them nicely, because they're not heavy embellishments. And that'll finish off this first card. card number 2 is going to be using one of the panels, and I'm going to Copic color. Now I have sped this up 8 times. Obviously, I don't color this quickly, but this is one of those panels where it is therapeutic to color, because you know it's a little bit bigger, which is what I like. But there are smaller images in one of the panel, or a couple of the panels, if you like that too. But this was just fun to just sit there and color, and I really enjoyed it. So the Copic colors that I used, the yellow is R21 and Y17, and I started with my lighter color and then went with my darker. I know that there are a lot of people who, especially if they've been coloring a while, will start with darker and then go lighter, but I just stick to what I know and what I like, which is to start with lighter and go darker. For my blues, I used B12 and B04, and then for the purples, I used V15 and V17. Then for the greens, I used YG03 and G14. For the light pink, I used RV11 and RV34. And then for the darker pink, or pinkish purple, I used V04 and RV06. Now I ended up choosing those colors because I was looking at them on my hex chart, and I thought that they went well together. And like I said, just a lot of fun to color these panels. And I chose the bigger ones just because, I don't know, it felt like a little bit easier, less fuss for me, because I wanted to color fairly quickly, but still enjoy the process as well. So now that I've got that going, and it's all colored, I'm going to use the Deco Foil Green Sketch by Brutus Monroe, and that you can find in the store, but I will link it down below. And I'm just going to trim down a panel because I plan to do some foiling. Now I use my Amazon Basics laminator, and I've had this heating up for probably a good 30-40 minutes or so. So while I was coloring, well, I guess it didn't take that long, so it was probably about 20-30 minutes. And then I have a piece of copy paper that I have sandwiched, so it's inside there, and then I just run that through my laminator. And actually the panel that you're going to see is the other one that I colored, because I forgot to film the first one that I colored. So I'm just going to kind of air that out a little bit to kind of cool it down. I don't know if that makes a difference or not. And then I slowly peel back the foil, and oh my goodness. Well, for starters, that green sketch foil is awesome. And on top of this panel with the big thick lines and it being a flower pattern, I thought this was just gorgeous. Now you may find that when you do the foiling that there's some spots that it just goes ahead and covers up, and if you just lightly use your finger, you can get some of that to go away, but don't rub over it too much, because you can get some of the black line as well. Isn't that pretty? So I'm going to use some of the purple cardstock that came in the kit, and I don't want to trim down any of my panel at all. So I'm just going to use some liquid glue to cover that whole back. And then I will stick this panel right over the top of that purple cardstock. And I like using the liquid glue because it gives me a little bit of an opportunity to kind of wiggle it around. And that is that. So for my sentiment, I'm using some vellum. I didn't want to cover up any of that beautiful background. So I'm using vellum. I have stamped my sentiment onto that vellum using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a pigment ink, a black pigment, and I covered that with clear embossing powder, and then I heat set that till that was smooth and melted. And you want to keep your heat gun moving over that vellum because you can warp it or burn it. Now I'm just putting a tiny little flag banner end, and then I'm going to trim down the rest of that panel. And this was a little bit too big to run through my Xyron sticker maker. It was a little too big. This is why I want the bigger one. So I decided to just take my liquid glue, and typically you wouldn't want to do this, like just use liquid glue like that because you'd see all those lines. But I took my finger and I rubbed that glue all over the back to kind of smooth that out and completely cover the back. And then I will stick that right on top of my panel. And that will end up finishing off this card. So I love this one. It's probably my favorite, mostly because of all the vibrant colors and just it covers that whole panel. Oh, so pretty. And the foiling. Can't go wrong with foiling. Card number 3 was fun because I got to use the stencil, and I'm using the Chroma Glaze. But to start out, I have some antique linen, Distress Oxide ink, and I'm using my VIVACE makeup brushes along with the stencil. I did just put a little bit of washi tape over that circle that is cut in the center, or in the corner there, because I was hoping that I wouldn't get the ink in that spot. I'm just going to move that stencil around to fill in that background, just leaving that lower right-hand side open so that I can use the chroma glaze there. So, yeah, I just figured that was big enough for that. So now I'm taping down my washi tape, using washi tape to tape down my stencil, and I'm using a palette knife along with the chroma glaze, and I'm doing very thin. This stuff spreads so easily. It's a lot like a very thin butter. And I've just spread that all around, and then I will take that off, and then I will go run that to the sink to kind of clean that off, because this stuff will dry fairly hard, so you don't want to leave that on your stencil. And it did take a little bit of time to dry, but look at how beautiful that is. I can't tell you how long, because I did walk away. I had some errands to run, so I would say at least 15-20 minutes is how long it would take with that thin of an area. So I'm going to take the glitter stock that came in the kit, and I'm going to trim this down because I want my panel to be backed with a small border of the glitter stock. And if you have, let's say you have rectangle dies, you could easily put that in the center, and this isn't even necessary, but I want to save as much of that glitter stock as I possibly can. So I'm just showing that I'm cutting out that rectangle in the center because you're not going to need that. So that I can save that for other future projects. And then this way, I still have a border around my card panel without wasting a bunch of that beautiful glitter stock. So I'll just use a little bit of liquid glue on the outside, and you'd want to use that or maybe some foam tape or something like that, because that, the glitter stock does have a good amount of texture, and this way it'll stay put. I wouldn't try a tape runner because I don't think that would work too well. And now I'm going to trim out, using just one of those scraps, I'm going to trim out 3 little leaves. These are all freehand leaves that I'm cutting, because I thought it would be fun to tie in the back also with the leaves that I plan to use. So I cut out 3 of those, and I end up trimming them down even a little bit more because they were a little too big for the panel. But I've got 3 leaves out of that tiny little scrap that I had. And now I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So I'm going to put some of the leftover white cardstock into, well, no, I didn't. This is some other white cardstock that I had. And I'm just sticking that in my mini Misti and stamping it down with Memento Tuxedo black ink. No real reason why I chose those, but that's just, that's what I had on hand, and I wanted it to be black. And then I'm going to tape or glue down my panel onto my card base, which is just some of that green cardstock that came in the kit. And then I'm going to use some Scotch, or not Scotch, but it is foam tape, all over the back of my sentiment, which I hand cut out. And then when I've decided where I want my petals, or my leaves, I will glue those down with some liquid glue. And then once I have those down, I will open up the card, and then I'll trim off the excess leaves. For a final bit of embellishment on this, I'm going to grab those Doris gemstones that came in the kit, and I'm just going to use the green ones sporadically all over the front of my card. And I'm using my paper piercer to pick them up. They're not super tiny, but they are big enough that my big old clunky hands could potentially take some of the sticky off by just using my hands. So I decided that it was probably best to use the paper piercer. And I always struggle with exactly where to put them. So I'll put this one down, and then I'm like, it's a little too, uniform. So I'll put one more. And then that'll finish off this card. I love that chroma glaze, so shiny and pretty. Card number 4 is going to be a shaker card, and I'm not going to show you the coloring because it's basically the same sort of thing that I did before, and I use the exact same colors, but I am going to stamp onto some Express-It cardstock, which is my favorite for Copic coloring, and I'm using my mini Misti along with some Memento Tuxedo black ink. This stamp is gorgeous. I love this stamp, and so I just inked that baby up. And I'm going to stamp it a couple times because I want to make sure that I have it all stamped nicely, that those lines are good and dark. And then I'm going to flip it. I'm going to keep it in my Misti and just flip it. And originally I thought I would do it this way. I thought this might save paper, but I thought, well, I want to, in case I need to, you know, have it in the right position, I just moved that up and that worked out perfect too. So I'm stamping that, and as you can see, I definitely need to stamp it again. So I'll ink it up. And the reason I have to stamp it like that is because I have that extra paper on the end. But that's okay. It's fine. It worked out. And so there they are, colored and fussy cut out. It didn't take that long, but I did do that. And so now I've got a couple of rectangle dies. These ones are from My Favorite Things. But I'm going to tape those together because I am trying to make a frame. And these are stitched frames. So they're like A2 size. So I'm just going to tape those together. And then I'm going to run that through my Big Shot machine, and now I have a frame. And I'm also running through some, well, I didn't have acetate, but here's a trick. If you don't have any acetate and you're trying to make shaker cards, you can use old packaging. I'm sure that a lot of you know that, but just in case you didn't know that, I just pulled out some old packaging that I had because I was like, oh no, I have no more acetate. How am I going to make this? So I am grabbing some 1/8 inch score tape, and I'm going to put that all around the back side of my frame, and then I will peel off all of that backing paper once I have all that down. And once all the backing paper is peeled off, I'm going to very, very carefully take that packaging rectangle that I made, and I'm going to, you know, very carefully stick that down, trying to line that up as good as I can. And it worked out pretty well. So it's a nice little trick. And now I'm just going to glue my flowers right down to the top of that. Normally I would probably use some foam tape, but I plan to, like I said, make this a shaker card, so I'm going to be using a decent amount of foam tape on the inside. So that's how that's going to look. Isn't that flower gorgeous? And it fits so perfectly onto an A2 card. I love it. So I just glued those down, and then I'm going to flip those over. Or no, actually first I'm going to try to stamp the sentiment. I finally found the re-inker to my StazOn ink pad, and I didn't get the best stamped image here, but because I'm doing this on packaging, I wasn't sure how that would do if I tried to heat emboss it, so I grabbed my StazOn, which is a solvent ink, and stamped that down, and it's good enough. But now I am covering the back. All those areas that are white, I am covering with some doubled up foam tape. So I took my foam tape and folded it over itself so that it has a double thickness. And then I am just covering that back. As you can see, I was very liberal with the foam tape. So now my card base is all ready, and I'm going to trim down another rectangle so I can cover that. And I've peeled off all the backing paper, and I'm using my embossing buddy on the inside, just on the edges, so that the sequins don't stick too much. And then I'm going to pour a decent amount of my sequins, probably about half of that bag, into my shaker. And then I'll take that other white rectangle and I will place that down, and then I will make sure and press very well so that those sequins don't leave back there. And so then for the final bit, I'll just take some liquid glue and adhere that to the card base, which is some more of that lavender cardstock from the kit. And that will finish off card number 4. I love how that turned out. That was so fun, and that coloring, oh, that was fun too. That's always fun. Card number 5 is actually a fairly easy one. I am going to use the Resistables. This was the 6x6 paper that has basically some embossing already on it. And I've trimmed that down to about 4 inches by 5 1/4, and I'm going to use some antique linen along with one of my VIVACE beauty brushes, and I am going to ink that up. So what you'll do is whatever ink you're using, you'll ink it up, and then you wipe away with like a soft dry cloth. And so I'm going to go ahead and, now that I know it works, I will go over my entire panel with my makeup brush and that antique linen Distress Oxide ink, and then I will take my microfiber cloth and I'll just brush that away. And then you can see it's very subtle because I chose a very subtle color to go over the top of it. It's, you know, you see the Resistible. It's really cool. I love the, it's kind of like the first card I did, except a little bit different, obviously. There's still some embossing and some resist, but yeah. So I am in love with that duct tape because it's, I mean, so simple. So I put this down, I cut some off, and I just taped it down to the front of my card. And I wanted to layer it up a couple times so that I have 2 pieces there. And so I'm going to end up flipping it just to variate the pattern. And then just stick that down. And I know there's a seam there, but that's really not that big of a deal because I am going to take some ribbon and I'm going to go over that with the ribbon. But even then, it really wouldn't be that big of a deal. I really like the way that duct tape works. And it packs quite a punch. So I am taking my ribbon, and originally I thought I would go ahead and do a bow on the ribbon. I wrapped it around and I started to do my bow, and then I realized I really didn't want a bow. So I pulled that out and then I just tied it in a knot. I thought that was pretty enough. And so then I trimmed down each of the ends and wind up my ribbon and save that for another project. And then I'm going to move on to my sentiment. So I started off using some of the leftover white cardstock I had, but the ink on that just was a little too dark. So I grabbed the back of the resistible, that piece that I had left over, and I got the same effect, which is, obvious because the paper is the same. So I just flipped it over. I'm on the side that doesn't have any of the embossing on it. And I covered that with that antique linen. And now I'm going to do some embossing. So I've talked about the Raven Sparkle Brutus Monroe embossing powder before. And yeah, nothing's changed. I still adore this stuff. I mean, look at how gorgeous this stuff is. And it's, fairly fine detail powder. So I just put that over the top after I stamp my image using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I use that because it is a pigment ink, so it does have a little bit of wetness to it. And so it'll hold the embossing powder perfectly. And then I covered it with my Raven Sparkle and then dumped the excess back into the container. And I'm covering that up because the last thing I want is to dump out my beloved Raven Sparkle embossing powder. And then I'm going to heat this. Now I start at the back with my heat tool, and then once it starts to kind of get heated up, you can flip over to the front. The reason you do that is so that the glitter doesn't fly everywhere. You don't want that going all over the place, so you start in the back. And look at how that shines and sparkles. So I'm going to just trim that out freehand. And then I'm going to take my panel and I'm going to cover the back of that with some foam tape for extra dimension. And I'm also going to cover the back of my sentiment. I'll peel off my backing paper, attach that to the pink card base, peel off the backing paper for my sentiment, and then I'll attach that. And that is actually not going to finish off the card because I forgot I had that tiny little piece and I wanted to put that on the inside. So I'll cover that with some liquid glue and then I'll put that on the inside. Trying to get that as straight as possible. And now this will finish off the card. So that is card number 5. I love that duct tape. It's so shiny and pretty. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 5 cards I made today. I actually did make an extra one, but that was with the coloring. So I would love to know which of these is your favorite if you have one. And if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, I do appreciate you guys stopping by, leaving some love. And as always, I will also have the products that I use listed down below. So go check out the Brutus Monroe page. There's a lot of goodies there. So thanks, guys.